Sinisterhood. Well, we were introduced to this case by the Duplass brothers.
Produced by them, directed by Thomas Tancred, and we went into it knowing nothing. And throughout and by the end, we were like, well, we have to cover this. This is
Yes.
so wild. It is one of the most captivating, compelling, twisty, turny documentaries I've ever seen. And it's especially given the literal landscape of where this takes place.
It's I like how it was framed in that it's like 5 chapters with like a prologue, because for a town of only 12 people, there is so much information. There's so much backstory that when we talk about crime in a big city and that there's all these major players, oh, well, it's just a small town with only 12 people. If someone is murdered, surely someone would hear something, know something, be able to report it. But it has spawned, I'll also try to ask to solve this mystery. It's spawned at least a book, which is it's just called Laram. It's called Laram, a missing man, an eyeless croc, and an outback town of 11 people who mostly hate each other, by Caroline Graham and Kylie Stevenson, who also did the Lost in Laram long form podcast. Someone sent us this book. I don't know who, I don't know when, but it was received in the mail. I don't know if it was like the publisher or what, but as we were watching this documentary, I looked up the book and I was like, I know that book cover, and it was in the studio. So it is for only 12 people. It fills at least, 300, 400 pages of this compelling book, a 6-part podcast series with bonus updates, a Duplass documentary. I think Australian, the NPR kind of Australia has made a documentary. So we're trying to distill all that down into one episode.
Thank you if it was you who sent the book.
Yes, whoever sent the book, please let us know.
We don't remember who it was, but thank you so much. It certainly came in handy. And like you said, this is for a town of only 12 people to have this much drama and just feuds, jealousy, gossip. At the same time, if you live in a town of 12 people, everybody knows everybody's shit. I mean, it's basically just a big family that their houses are spread out from each other. So and then given it's in such a remote part of Australia, which is already fucking scary to me, like out in the bushland, just where nothing around the roads aren't paved. Of course, it's just dirt roads, wildlife everywhere. One hotel that's also the bus stop, that's also the pub, that's also the post office. I mean, and
a store, and also
the whole meeting place for the whole town. Yeah. It's wild that more people had not heard about this until kind of these people picked up this story and ran with it, and now it's pretty well known, but I had not heard of this until we watched the documentary, and now I'm pretty obsessed with this story.
I know. I got way into reading this book, the absolute solitude that's out there, and how they said at one point, if it gets so dark, you can kind of see the curve of the earth. I was like, you standing on the end. When I was a kid and I watched the movie Never Ending Story, and there's a big ass waterfall and all the shit falls off the end of the earth, I thought that was Australia. I genuinely thought at one end of Australia on the Pacific Ocean side, the other side, not coming from the side you would come out, honestly, from LA in a plane. So that doesn't make sense. But I thought that was it. I wasn't a flat earther. I don't know. I maybe thought there was a hole going down there, but I was a little kid, so that's kind of a stupid thing. And boy, you hear that there's a sinkhole that could be 5 kilometers wide, and maybe I'm not too far off. That, quote, appears out of nowhere and just takes you. Or the croc thing we saw where fucking all those crocs were out. What were we watching?
I can't remember the name. Unfortunately, it spawned like all these TikTokers visiting to try and go across this stretch of. Sometimes you can drive across it, but then when the tide comes in, you can't. And all these saltwater crocodiles just hang out on the edge waiting for somebody to fall in or eating fish. And it's the amount of crocodiles in one space. When you see these videos, too much of anything is too much of something. But
it's too many.
They said if you can see one croc, there's 20 you can't see. And in these videos, you see about 20. So I'm no mathematician, but that's
Me
like
neither.
400 crocodiles, something.
So many.
I
Just
don't
so
know.
many.
I did zero math. I just literally yelled out a number that I thought might be it. It's probably
It could be.
4,000. What's
It could
20
be.
times 20?
Siri? I feel like you double the 2 and add a O, so I do think it's 400.
Okay, well,
I'm
if
gonna go
only
with
there
it.
was a way that we could fact check that, but
No
sadly
worries.
there's
No worries.
not.
Well, I was also just reading about the bush and the Northern Territory in this area nearby, and how some like exotic game has been either let loose from zoos or accidentally got loose. So some guy in the bush thought he was shooting like a wild hog, and it was like a endangered hippopotamus.
Oh!
But it was like feral because it was out because it had gotten loose and everything. So this is that part. It's not the, you see the beautiful Sydney Opera House or Melbourne when we've covered cases that are located there. This is out of nowhere.
This ain't that.
We're out
This
and they've
is
never.
It's at the end of the earth.
The never.
It just falls off. It's the curvature of the earth. It's where this is happening.
A never-ending story.
It's amazing that on this planet, both the way we live and the way Laram residents live are happening on the same rock, because they couldn't be more different. But it's storytelling that unites us all and allows us to hear stories like that. And this one is a doozy. So if you haven't heard of it before, we're trying to cover kind of all of it. But yeah, like Heather mentioned, all of those podcasts and books do an even deeper dive, because you would think, 12 people, surely that can be told pretty quickly.
Oh, there's infighting. There's jealous. It's like
so
Angela talking
much
about her
infighting.
cats. There's jealousies, bad blood. Like you can't leave them alone. I mean, it's true, but I've gotten a good feeling about this at the end. So stick with it, because it gives me hope for humanity. So all that to say, as we talk about this wacky place, but it's a real place, and these are real people, and I think that's what makes it the most like a beautiful story of the friends wanting to tell their missing friends legend, honestly, because his nailing down where he's really from and who he is hard. So at least the legend of Paddy.
Yes. Well, I'm Christy.
I'm Heather.
And let's get into it. Prior to the arrival of the Europeans, the area in the Northern Territory of Australia, known as Laram, was originally occupied by the Yangman First Nations people for more than 40,000 years. These indigenous people gave Laram its name, which translates to
meeting place.
During the late 1800s, the Northern Australian Railway made its way to the territory, eventually making Laram a bustling outpost during World War II, transporting soldiers and supplies across Northern Australia. During the height of the war, Laram was home to over 6,000 military recruits. However, once the war ended and the railway officially closed in 1981, the remote territory saw a steady decline in residents. By 2017, only 12 colorful locals remained.
It's interesting to hear about Laram in the 80s when some of these players, we'll learn about Fran and Billy, they moved there in 1985, and some other, they were like in their mid 40s, and they would have cricket tournaments, which they were like, it was pretty much just drinking, and also there was cricket. And the videos from back then, it shows way more than just 12 people having fun, running around. But then you juxtapose that with this sort of somewhat deserted looking wasteland.
Very isolated. It's isolated.
Fran is living in, one of the residents ends up living in the old police station that gets shut down. Another's living in an old roadhouse that's shut down. So it's also odd because there's people living there, but it's not like little houses everywhere. Cause it's like, oh, I live in the bar. Oh, I live in the old post office.
It's like a ghost town that people moved into and then kind of revamped, but it's still has the look of a ghost town.
Yeah. And when I didn't think about it either, that they said as cars got larger gas tanks, nobody needed to stop there anymore. And stopping for gas was kind of the thing. Well, then the gas station burned down. It doesn't get rebuilt because people don't really stop there. So then nobody stops there for any reason. And for the 80s and 90s, one of the people said, oh, it's kind of like a hippie paradise. There was a lot of us. We were taking care of each other, having a good time. But it's interesting how it dwindled when there are so many fewer people. So you really do need to stick together. And what happens is you turn on each other.
It's when your pool of people that you see on a regular basis is so small, your world becomes so small. And therefore, anyone you have a feud with, you see every single day. You don't have other outlets where you can go and like get away from people. You're miles or kilometers. So many kilometers. I had to look up so many conversions of kilometers and miles and feet to kilometers.
And Celsius
Why don't
to
we just all fucking use what the rest of the world uses? It would be so much easier for my job, sure, but also for everybody in the world. Like, why do we fuck it up? Why? Because we're Americans. That's why we love to fuck things up in a different way.
That Nate Bargatze sketch on SNL is still killing me, where he's like, "We will use speech," and they're like, "How many is that?" No one knows. It's impossible to tell.
One of the best sketches I think they've had in over a decade, for real.
Good.
But your world becomes so small and insular that it can go one of two ways, and it seems like either way is going to be super extreme. Either you get very tight knit and close, almost too close, or everyone becomes each other's enemy, and it's just this gossipy town where
factions
and grudges are held and nothing can be let go. But I mean, that's all you have. Like, you're not getting cell reception out there. Maybe you get a TV station. They never really mentioned TV.
Bill was like, I was the first one to get a TV out here. And it was like a big deal that he was the only one with a TV for a while. And now they have TVs, especially in the pub. But that's the thing is, if the pub has the TV with the best channels and now you're fighting with the pub owner, you're ousted from the cool kids who get to go to the pub. And they said when this new pub owner, Barry, the publican, had taken over, there was some sort of feuds going on. And he immediately went in a pub where from the 80s and 90s, 2000s, people's pictures on the wall, had gone through with a red Sharpie and was like Xing people's face off. Like, you're barred for, you'll bar for 6 months. You're barred for this long. And people don't like that. And they're like, oh, you're going to bar me? I'm never coming back. And so now you have dug in people on both sides, and it over something, one guy that is alleged to have stolen a Mars bar, which he says, Cookie says he never stole a Mars bar. He's like, I never stole a Mars bar in my life. But that allegation 15 years ago, he's never been back to the only single place in town where you can get your mail and get a drink and see the, football game that's playing, from the big city. That's so isolating.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's you're living, working, having relationships with the same dozen people all within a square mile of each other.
It's
it would be a lot keg.
It's also just a lot of pressure to be like, but if you're somebody who goes, I'm a retiree, I don't really give a fuck what people think about me. Then if everybody has that attitude,
then you get a lot of podcasts and a book and a documentary made about something that goes down. While their proximity to each other may have forced them to be close, the interpersonal relationships among the Laram dozen were rife with gossip, jealousy, and long-standing feuds. So when one of them went missing on December 16th, 2017, everyone became a suspect. Patrick Joseph Moriarty was born March 30th, 1947 in Limerick, Ireland. His birth certificate lists Mary Moriarty as his mother and no father. Journalists Caroline Graham and Kylie Stevenson, creators of the podcast Lost in Laram and authors of the book Laram, tracked down some family members who sadly had no idea Paddy had been born. One cousin told the journalist Paddy was likely fostered out to another family since he was born out of wedlock. A lifelong friend said in an interview that Paddy spoke fondly of a mother, father, and several sisters, though he later said his parents died in a car accident. So it's kind of hard to tell what his backstory was. No one really, and Laram is a town that if you are a loner and you're kind of a drifter, it might attract you. Maybe you don't want people knowing your history and your backstory, and then you get a lot of people like that, and suddenly, like, does anyone really know the truth about anybody that's there?
Right. You only know what somebody has shown you, which is like, oh, he's a good mate. He lets me borrow his lawnmower. Like, he's all right. Versus you don't know what somebody had done for the decades before coming there. And even 2 highly trained journalists with the resources of a publication behind them had to really track down. I mean, it was like sifting through tons of stuff, trying to dig out. And there were so many ends that they reached that were just dead ends, that they were like, okay, we drove 400 miles to this place from the 70s because somebody told us for sure this was here. And then of course it's like not there. And bless them, because a good portion of the book is fascinating of how, as a journalist, especially when you're faced with someone whose life is a myth and has been a myth.
Mm-hmm.
How do you even run down the truth? And what is the truth? Including people in town who are like you said, Barry Sharp, the publican, said, yeah, I stopped in for a beer once and stayed the next day and the next day and the next day. And then I decided to buy the place. So you're like, when was that? I don't know, probably 20, 30 years ago. You're like 20 or 30 years ago.
Yeah. There's a whole decade in there that
so
maybe,
much time.
Who knows where you were.
There's like every day's the same, mate. You're like, well, that's true.
That's the thing too. When it is every day is the same, and your routine is just so like, there's no variation in it. You have no variety, that your days do blur together. It's hard to remember like specifics when it's like, well, I don't know. I walk the same dirt path every day. So it could have been Monday. It could have been Friday. It was maybe been 10 years ago. I don't know. Every day is the same out here.
Now, who gives a shit about a calendar or a clock?
Yeah. No, you live and die by the sun.
True. The one thing they cared about was the news program that aired on like noon on Sundays, and they would all come at noon on Sundays. So that was like one way to track folks. But if you didn't know what day it was, like you may not show up to that.
Paddy arrived in Australia's Northern Territory via ship in 1966 or 67 when he was around 18 years old. He spent most of his adult life working on cattle ranches as a gardener, cowboy, and general ranch hand. One of those ranches was located less than 1,000 feet from an Aboriginal settlement in the Northern Territory, 186 miles, or 300 kilometers, from the nearest town. The book Laram describes the heinous living conditions for Aboriginal people in that area, including the power imbalance in the sexual relationships between non-Aboriginal stockmen and Aboriginal women. Paddy seemed to participate in one or more of these relationships. He told a handful of trusted friends he had 7 daughters with an Aboriginal woman. A bartender in Laram recalled to interviewers that a woman would sometimes call a pub asking for Paddy, speaking in a manner he identified as that of an Aboriginal person. Each time, Paddy pretended not to be there.
And this is something that Graham and Stevenson spend a lot of time trying to run down, going to the ranch where he worked, confirming, was he there? They found a bunch of ship manifests from all the ships that came from Ireland to that port in Australia, and Paddy's name wasn't on any of them. No Patrick, no Paddy, no whatever, no Moriarty. So they're also like, is that your real name?
Right.
I mean, I think so. If it is, then who came on that ship and how did you get here? And did you use a fake name to get on the ship? And why?
But
Why'd
also,
you lie?
how would you even know if it's his fake name? Because his family did not even know he was born.
Yeah.
So, there's no roots to even trace it back to. And some things I read said 7, some other things said 9 kids. Yeah. So even that, it's impossible to know. So if you're one of those children, you have no idea who your dad is or really anything about him, which lends itself to like part of your history you also know nothing about.
Yeah, you don't get to trace that back and understand where you came from fundamentally. And Paddy had family that were kind of second, third cousins and stuff that they trace even to the States. But it's a great question. Is it a Moriarty or that specific Moriarty? And they're folks that live in that area seem perfectly happy to be offline like that. We're unfindable.
I think you don't really ask questions. Everyone's there for their own reasons. When you're in a place that remote and isolated that lends itself to people that like to be off the grid, they might be loners. No one's really asking the hard-hitting questions like that. You're not digging into people's past because maybe you don't want people digging into yours. Yeah,
and I think you just said something very prescient for when, police and journalists show up. What happens?
Around 2008, Paddy moved to Laram. He worked as a hand at the hotel/pub, taking out trash, cleaning the bathrooms, and speaking to tourists in the role of an unofficial town concierge. In 2010, he bought a disused service station on the north side, just across from the town's Devonshire tea house. This made him direct neighbors with the tea house's owner, Fran Hodgetts.
Yeah, when he was described by one of the search and rescue guys who serviced that area and knew him, he was described as kind of like the Walmart greeter of the town. That he was just out there, and he's short in stature gentleman with a big thick mustache, always wearing a cowboy hat, always got a quadruple X gold like beer in his hand, and is like, hey,
everyone in the town has a beer in their hand all the time in that documentary. It was truly, I mean, people would get up off the cooler they're sitting on while filmmakers are talking to them and be like, mind if I crack a cold one, mate? And I'm like,
right there.
And that's the casualness of this town. It's like, you want to talk to us? That's cool, but we're not going to change anything that we do.
Yeah, it's like, this is how we do things around here. What? And Paddy he was like that. He was just sitting at the same spot in the bar and could crack 2 whips at the same time. I bet he got I don't bet. He got such a kick out of the tourists watching him.
Oh, yeah.
And when Graham and Stevenson tracked down to a place he had worked near before, it was called the Heartbreak Hotel. It's like about 400 miles away, and said, oh, yeah, they said while he was here, he was kind of the same, kind of a ranch hand, could help mow, water things, and that he got a real big kick out of taking a fake gun. And when busloads of tourists would drive up, he would jump on the bus and be like, all right, give me your wallets. And they'd scream, and he'd be like, oh, it's fake.
Just
and
kidding.
He's like,
God damn.
But everybody would be like, he's a larrikin. He's a larrikin, mate, which we had to look up. And it's a person who's like boisterous, kind of a bad boy, likes to tell.
Kind of a lad, if you're in the UK, or what would that be in American terms? Honestly, I don't think frat boy, because that's a bit different. Not a douchebag, because he wasn't that. It was like, he was a very colorful, cheeky character who was a bit mischievous. He liked to get into trouble. He liked to pull pranks. He was loved by many, but also hated by many. He had a very polarizing personality where you either loved him or you hated him. And honestly, it depended on were you on his good side or his bad side?
Yeah, and they said he was really close with Barry, the publican who took over and was willing to throw people out. And so, I imagine if it's one of those, well, if you're cool with Barry, you're cool with me, and if you're not, then you're not. And in a town where there's only 12 people, having those hard running, either loyalties or feuds, it's just extreme feelings like that, as we'll see, I think, met out extreme results.
Paddy lived alone with his dog, a 12-month-old red Kelpie named Kelly. He spent his days in Laram, which consisted of the same routine. He would wake up and walk Kelly around the rubbish dump before stopping back by his place. He owned a red Honda quad bike with a platform on the back for Kelly. The pair would ride to the pub where Paddy would perform work for Barry Sharp, the bar's owner.
The footage of, I think his name is Des. Well, I love Kelly is the cutest dog. Aww. She's so sweet. But the dump is folks from around dump stuff there. So it's not just their dump. And showing the search and rescue guy, Des, who is the one that gets up off of his cooler and cracks the beer in the middle of it. He's like, hey, we got all kinds of stuff out here. And there's a refrigerator. And he's like, you got to open this up. There could be something in it. And then it opens up. He's just walking on the dump, opens it. There's a rope sort of fashioned almost like in noose ways. He's like, you probably don't want to touch that. You already did, man.
What else is out here, bud? And beyond just refrigerators with ropes, you got crocodiles, you got snakes. So many snakes, spiders the size of dinner plates, kangaroos just fighting everywhere. It's the Australian outback might be my biggest irrational fear, because I have full control over not going there. But
you talk about it a lot, more than this episode.
I've never been to Australia. Want to go so bad. Honestly, want to go visit a place like Laram, because I want to see what that is like. It's, it's so different from how we live. At the same time, totally terrified.
Yeah. The thing is, once they said a sinkhole that's 5 kilometers across, I can't do it, because I can't run a 5 kilometer faster than a sinkhole can happen.
No, sinkholes are immediate. And so unless you have the power of flight, you're fucked. You're going down with the hole, man. And nothing is around to save you. Your best hope is grabbing onto some 50-foot snake that happens to be on the outskirts of the sinkhole, and maybe using it Rapunzel style to crawl up out of there. But that's Very unlikely.
I shouldn't be stressed out because if I'm there, I'm already at the edge of the world. Falcor is going to swoop in and save me. I don't have to worry about it. I'll be all right. If I can be irrational of thinking of myself into it, I can be irrational thinking myself out of it. But
and those are words for all of us to live by.
There you go.
No matter where you live. In the afternoons, Paddy would buy and drink around 8 beers before retiring home in the late afternoon or evening. He was such a frequent visitor to the pub that he had his own seat to the left of the bar. His house was kept immaculately organized with a spot for everything. A man of routine, Paddy always dressed in similar outfits: khaki shorts, flip-flops, and a baseball cap or cowboy hat. Self-conscious of his baldness, Paddy was very careful not to go anywhere without his hat. Some friends told filmmakers they didn't even know he was bald because he never went anywhere without it.
When they asked Bill about it, he goes, bald as a bowling ball.
But really, other than the missing person flyers, there's no footage of him without that cowboy hat. I mean, it's to the point where it's kind of like an off-white color, but the sweat stain around, like, you know, where it meets your head looks as if someone has just taken a brown band and put it around. It's part of the hat now.
From far off, it seems like it's a piece of leather. And then when the photo is close up, you're like, oh, that's just a stain. No, otherwise was maybe used to be a white hat. But the description is, you're right, though. The picture of him on the missing poster is like, I think his passport or driver's license photo. So you can't wear a hat there. But all the footage of him, Australian Broadcasting Company came out like in 2011 and did some interviews with folks. Every second of that footage, him on camera, he's got a hat on. Every picture of him, any, candids of him in the background, whatever. It's not just like he was posing and put a hat on. It's like, wake up in the morning. They said he'd always wake up, put his hat on, keys on his side, wallet in his pocket, period. Like that was it.
It's like when my brothers were in high school and I was in college, and for years, several of their friends like never knew that I existed. like they knew that they had a sister, but it was like a snuffleupagus type of situation. Like, did she exist, or does she only exist when Zach is around, or Kyle? Because I didn't live in the same area.
Right. Yeah. You just would never, you take it for granted. You never know it's even there. She's a myth, like a cryptid.
And then they met me. They're like, oh God, no, the myth is real.
It's like, she is everything and more.
Yeah. Yeah. Bar owner Barry Sharp called Paddy.
Good-natured, happy-go-lucky man.
And said Paddy seemed to love living in Laram. As one of just a dozen residents, Paddy had been interviewed by journalists reporting on Laram in the years before his disappearance. In a 2011 interview, he said of the town,
"Oh, I love it. I don't mind it. Good, yeah. I come up to the pub here, have a good drink, meet Barry, all the locals. I won't say too much about everyone."
The interviewer then asked Paddy how everyone got along, to which Paddy replied,
"They don't."
So this was a big kind of reveal in the documentary, because it starts off with like this small town. Everyone's talking fondly of people. And then it's like any good documentarian, it pulls you in and then kind of slowly unravels that, oh, everyone hates each other and has a huge issue with each other. And you mean your ex-husband has been living in the trailer next to you for the past 40 years and you don't speak? How is that even possible?
And he's friends with the guy that lives across the street from you, that you literally open your blinds and you could probably make eye contact with him as close as it is across the road. Granted, it's a highway where people probably go, 80 miles an hour. But if you know there's no cars out there passing that often. So yeah, like within spitting distance is a person that you somehow get to, as best friends with your ex-husband. So maybe you don't have a good attitude about.
And that you also hate.
Yes, and it's quite shocking because everybody's like, "Oh, Paddy was a load of fun. He's so great. He's a legend. Everyone loves him." And then you watch this interview with him, and he's like, "I hate Fran." He calls her an old mole. He calls her a gas bagger, and he calls her a cunt, like right in succession.
Succession.
In a very
it's what we call a trifecta. He really nailed all three of those. It's the Father, Son, Holy Spirit of insults right there.
A mole, a gas bagger, and a C word.
Amen, man. It's and then it starts to come out. Oh yeah, he was a good lad. But everybody, also kind of hated him, and
he was kind of a dick, though.
Shit. Yeah, you're like, oh fuck, what? So you thought everybody was like cool with his antics, and then you're like, nah, I get it though, because if I had to be around the same person every day, all the time, with no break, that was always having antics and pranks, that would drive me bananas. And you can't just drive into town because it's 400 kilometers away is the next town. So there's no escape unless you're like, well, I guess I'll just sit in my house by myself and seethe while the other 11 people go down to the pub.
Well, and the way that Caroline Graham and Kylie Stevenson describe it, you can hear everything. So even if you're in your house, if somebody's hollering up the street, you may not hear exactly what they're saying, but you're like, they're going on about it again. Turn the fucking TV up, or just because you can't.
Or you're like, are they talking about you?
Wait,
put your ear. I mean, everybody's just so up in everybody's business. As somebody who likes people out of my business, I couldn't. I just could never live in a place where it was this small.
That's the thing, is I like to think that I'm like open-hearted and accepting of everything, but I am a Scorpio, and to the extent that's relevant, if someone does something, I'm like, that's it, we're done. We're done.
Yeah. You need to be able to have separation and, get some distance from people if you need. And it's just not possible there unless you're like, well, I'm going on a months-long vacation holiday so I can get away from Paddy.
Which they would do sometimes and like leave for long stretches, but that does suck that like the only way to have peace is to be away from where you want to live and you like it and you otherwise would choose to live there. But it seems like the type of folk that move out to a place like this are set in their ways and you can't convince them of other stuff. And then especially if somebody else that they fucking hate is trying to convince them of something, they're like, I'll stay longer. I'll die here right now just to show you. The vibe is great.
Dug in a lot of toxic feuds. But yeah, if you're kind of an outlaw, this is the type of place for you to be.
And that's what they asked one of the police officers, the investigators, like, oh, well, can you describe Larama's relationship with the police? And he's like, they don't really need us. He's like, they're just down there. They don't really call us for anything. Nothing really goes on. In the 2011 interview.
Or does it? And they just don't call you for anything because they've all had a town meeting and decided we will handle this internally.
It seems just like, hey, whatever. He was just like, they call us or they don't. And one of the guys said, well, in the 2011 interview footage, Carl, one of the guys that his family owned a couple of things and sold them off and stuff. But he said, well, there hasn't been a murder here or anything yet. And you're like, oh, that's very prescient. And very eerie to look back at later because it's when the town dwindles, when people's resources are gone, when there's choices are gone, then they start to get forced into actions and behaviors that they might not otherwise take.
It's a real Lord of the Flies situation.
It's getting there.
Known for her exotic meat pies, which, according to Fran Hodgetts,
put Laram on the map. That was a good impression of Fran Hodges.
That was perfect. No, it was great. I want to acknowledge, obviously, Heather's Australian accent superior to mine, which is not even probable. Everyone in Australia is like, where is she from? It's hard to tell. Texas, England? Like it's just weird. So, but I'm going to keep it up because I'm having fun doing it.
If you like it, I say continue.
That was a great Fran Hodgetts impression. And also, I want to go on record saying Australia has the best accent of anywhere in the world.
When I was listening to Lost in Laramie, Kylie and Caroline's voices and their accents, I was like, oh, you win. This is my favorite.
For sure.
But Fran, I listened to a lot of audio of Fran and a lot of these people because I like to do it not just an Australian accent, but kind of a little bit sound like them to the extent I can without, making fun of them because I genuinely, care about what happens to all these folks. But we don't really quote her that much. So I was like, I'm going to put all my oomph into this.
Well, you did it. You nailed it. Well, Fran was furious when pub owner Barry began selling his own meat pies. Fran was offended and felt Barry was in the wrong for inciting competition. Not a fan of Fran, Paddy seemed to relish in her resentment, fanning the flames whenever possible.
There's probably like 10 different interviews with Fran on camera, on audio, and whatever. And in every one of them, she's like, my pies put this place on the map.
Mm-hmm.
She said, nobody in the Northern Territory is making pies. Nobody but me. Nobody. Like, you can't prove it. But I love it that she's insistent.
It doesn't matter that she can't prove it. You don't argue with Fran. If she says it, you take it as gospel. What were the meats because they just kept saying exotic meats. And then at some point in the documentary, they show a sign with the specific animals. And we were both shocked to learn those were the animals that were being used. And now I can't remember what they were.
Crocodile pies, crocodile meat, buffalo meat. Those were the ones I remember.
I thought that they were more shocking than that.
Let me see if there's...
Because those don't shock me that much. But also... Oh, yeah. They have 12 residents, but really 13 because they have a pet crocodile that lives in a little enclosure behind the bar.
Camel.
Barry just goes out and feeds. That was it. It was Camel.
It was Camel. Camel, she said camel pies and crocodile pies. And yeah, crocodile, they call him Ray Ray. They named him Ray Charles because he's missing eyes. So they have to feed a crocodile that can't see. And what a task to put anything near the mouth of a croc that can't see. What's the difference between the food you're feeding it and your arm? So
you gotta hold it on a long stick, and then you put a raw chicken or whatever they're feeding it on the end, and he's still got his sense of smell. So I guess that's how Ray can find it with his little snout.
Yeah, he can find it. But yeah, hers is and she proudly said camel pies, crocodile pies. She said she was the first one to put camel and crocodile together in one pie.
The CNC.
It's the old CNC music factory. CNC meat pie factory. Sinisterhood will be right back. I don't have any trips planned on the agenda right now, but I have some dream trips that I might want to go on. And I am getting out of the habit of just sitting around and hoping Paris knows what I think. I tell him most things, but some, of like, oh, don't do this. Yes, please do that. I'm pretty open. But something like a far off, a secret wish or hope that hasn't come up in conversation. I'm like, how do I just tell him that? And I wasn't even thinking about it, but the Paired app asked me, and then I got to tell him. And then he's like, I've been wanting to go to Tokyo too. And I'm like, oh my gosh, me too. That's going to take us a really long time to save up for and plan. So I'm really glad that we found out now and not like 2 years from now when we might go and then be like, well, we haven't really been planning it. But that's the magic of Paired. It was like, hey, what do you think? What are you feeling right now? And it helped me express a feeling I wouldn't have otherwise expressed.
Some things you don't even think to talk about. And then when the prompt is given to you to discuss, you're like, oh, that's so, no wonder. Of course, we're married, we're in love, we're soulmates. Of course, we want to do the same things. But you wouldn't have really said it and spoken it out loud and realized that if not for the beautiful app Paired. It's a relationship app for couples. You and your partner download the app, you pair together, and every day Paired gives you questions, quizzes, and games to have fun, stay connected, and deepen your conversations.
It's simple and often hilarious, and each day you get a quiz to play or a question to answer, and I really like this part. You cannot see your partner's answer until you answer yourself or vice versa, because I'm usually the faster to answer one, and so I'll answer. But I like Paris will go, oh, you said something on the Paired app? I'm like, yeah, go answer your question and then you'll see.
I like that. It incentivizes you. You can't be one-sided because they're like, this isn't solo, this is paired. So you both have to be participating in this. Whether you're just a few dates in or have been together a long time, it's time to lighten the mood and have fun with your partner by using Paired. Head to paired.com/creepy to get a 7-day free trial and 25% off if you sign up for a subscription.
Just head to paired.com/creepy to sign up today. Connect with your partner every day using Paired. A happier relationship starts here. Sinisterhood will be right back.
Siding with his friend Barry, Paddy began bad-mouthing Fran's pies to travelers passing through. He even went so far as to put a sign up at his house, encouraging tourists to spend their money at the pub rather than Fran's. As Paddy lived across the street from Fran, this slap in the face was a daily reminder of her and Paddy's tumultuous relationship.
And if he's acting as the Walmart greeter of the town and he's kind of fun and charismatic when tourists come in and they're paying $13 to $18 per pie just because it's expensive because you're way out in there. In the bush.
I don't know the rate of camel meat these days, but that seems over here, that'd be like a $5,000 pie.
Yeah, I don't know that
they're probably more like prevalent over there, but still and also getting shipments into a town that small, and it's the only place to stop for hundreds of kilometers. Like, it's going to be a markup. That makes sense.
A beer was like $13. So yeah. And they're like, well, it's out of town prices or bush prices. You're kind of known that you're going to pay that much. So for her to lose all that many sales, I would be real pissed too. And it's a nice professional sign that Paddy put up that was like, do not eat the pies here. And bless Fran, she's somebody's grandma, she's an older lady. She was trying to make her own signs and they look a little bit wild, that if you were a tourist and had you not been told by a nice guy with a mustache and a couple of whips, like, oh yeah, you want the right pie, go to that one, you might go to hers. But because it was already kind of strange looking, and you have this very charismatic character going, she's gonna poison you with her pies, which he would say, or he'd go, there's dog shit in those pies, or there's dead dog in those pies, and like make these outrageous claims just to be bitchy because he didn't like her.
No, yeah. And he's also good friends with her ex-husband, who lives right there too, who that man and his story is a whole other. He had just had in his interviews part of his tongue removed from tongue cancer. And so he's hard to understand. His nickname is Light Can because he drinks just so much beer all of the time. He looks like he's hard down on his luck, and he speaks of Fran like she's the only woman I've ever loved, and it's like, because she's the only woman you ever really knew, I mean, they lived there and then they divorced, but they still live like within 10 feet of each other. And then you see them every day. Imagine you have to see your ex who you're on bad terms with every day.
Yeah.
I would walk right to the edge of the earth and just jump right off, because I can't imagine how awkward and just constant reminder of pain that and then you've got your asshole neighbor that you don't like is also friends with him. It's just this circular, insular, like everybody hates each other and gossipy and nobody can get along and everyone's got a reason to be mad at somebody.
Yeah. And Paddy cut the penis off of a dead donkey and threw it at her house and then told everyone, oh, those are donkey dick pies, and laughing and cutting up and thinking it's so funny. And like,
and also let's just pause for a second. And how unhinged that is.
Yeah, yeah.
That you're the type of person that would find a dead donkey and be like, I'm going to cut its dick off and then throw it at my enemy's house. That is unhinged behavior.
To hear the cop go, well, nothing really goes on down in Laram. It's like that you're being called about, because you then see what happens when everybody, and I'm not saying like, oh, they need a police station in Laramie, but it's sad to see, oh man, you are all each other have. Like you are, like you said, it's a family and you could choose to act like that, or you could choose to throw donkey dicks on their yard.
And maybe that's just the way of the bush. It's things are wilder out there and people don't get as upset, or things are, it's wacky. These are, these are just like wacky antics, but
it's a good way to put it. The way of the bush. Wacky antics
can also lead to a lot of real world problems.
Real anger.
Yeah, for sure. December 16th, 2017 started out like any other day for Paddy. After walking his dog Kelly around the rubbish dump, the pair headed to the Pink Panther pub, Paddy driving his quad bike while Kelly perched on her seat in the back. After enjoying his standard 8 beers, Paddy headed out for the evening, indicating to Barry he would be back in the morning to borrow his lawnmower. He and Kelly then left the pub on his quad bike. When Paddy didn't show the next morning, Barry clocked it as odd, but didn't think much more of it. It wasn't until that evening, when Paddy didn't come down to the pub for their nightly rounds of drinks, that Barry decided to pay Paddy a visit the next day to check in on his friend. Barry visited Paddy's property on December 18th, noting that Paddy's car, quad bike, and wallet and cash were all at his house, but there was no sign of Paddy. 2 nights prior, as Paddy was leaving the pub, a tourist had given him some chicken to take home for Kelly. Now, Barry could see the chicken was still in the microwave, almost as if Paddy had begun to prepare it for his dog, but was unable to complete the task. Perhaps most suspicious was the presence of Paddy's hat, something he never left home without. Still, Barry chalked it up to a fluke, decided against calling the police. The next day, when there was still no sign of Paddy, Barry, now worried, called in a missing persons report to the authorities.
No, this is kind of endemic of their friendship. It's like, oh, well, I'll see you later. Oh, I don't want to bug him. I don't want to go over there and ask him where he's at. But it does beg the question of, I guess it was just a lazy Sunday. You know, everybody's hanging out. You don't worry about it too much that it was so long before any authorities were contacted, except to know that they didn't really ever contact the authorities for anything.
Yeah, it's and that's been one of the main things that's pointed out in this case is, had the police been called sooner, would there have been a different outcome? Because by the time he was last seen to when they're called in, it's 3 days. In a town of 12, when you see everybody that lives there, every day, you know, I mean, it's that small. And especially Barry and Paddy, you know, they were besties. They saw each other all the time. They spent a ton of time
daily.
Together. If I had not heard from you and you had planned on coming by to borrow something and you didn't show up, and then I went over and things looked out of place, I would certainly call the cops. But again, this is the law of the bush, and people out there just don't get into each other's shit. Well, a lot of times they do, but then sometimes it's like, well, it's not my business. Well, maybe he's just out for a walk. But I don't know, like, where could you go? You know?
Exactly. Especially if his car was there and his four-wheeler was there, his quad bike, they call it. I'm redneck. I'm like, they kept saying quad bike. I was like, that's such a fancy way to call it four-wheeler. But anyways, his four-wheeler's there. Everything was there. And Karen, who's one of the newer residents that she and her husband recently moved there, she said that she also went after Barry's like, I went to go look and, you know, it's kind of weird. Just like he hadn't been there. And she said, we always knew his back door was open. And so we went to go check on him. But it's just one of those things where I think everybody, you go, oh, well, he'll turn up. Like,
surely nothing could have happened. Yeah.
Your brain doesn't essentially immediately go to the worst place. And she just said that walking through his house was the eeriest thing that she's ever done in her life, because everything was where he would set it if he was going to go to bed or like at home, like where his hat would get set next to his wallet, next to his keys, next to his key card. And then all of the things that he would take if he was going to go out for a walk, like the Mozzie spray, you know, his bug spray, everything was all set exactly. And then the package from the chicken that they had given the dog was just sitting there. And so it's that creepy feeling like we talked about with the Chris Reagan case, where his apartment was in a stasis. Like he was in the middle of doing something and was kept from coming back to it. Not, okay, I'm going to lock up and close up and be gone. It's like the windows open, the fan's on, the TV's on, whatever. So she just said she felt such an eerie feeling, and she said it was the worst moment of her life, and she doesn't ever want to do something like that again.
Yeah, his life was clearly interrupted in the middle of him living it, and everything remained the same. And the dog also was nowhere to be found, which was another big red flag.
Extremely unusual.
Not wanting to wait on the police to begin searching for their friend, fellow Laram residents searched on their own. Combing the familiar paths Paddy was known to routinely walk. Then, on December 21st, 6 days after Paddy was last seen, search and rescue, police, and the tactical response group arrived in Laramie to canvass the bushland.
And I saw an interview with Thomas Tankard where he said they didn't even get to cover, it's a 2-hour documentary and they still couldn't cover everything, but a monsoon happened between when the call got in for Paddy and the police were able to come. So now you have the wet season in Australia. It's 100 degrees during the day, and then all of a sudden it's this massive rainstorm, shit floods everywhere, washes away, and then the police are able to finally come and search, which does not bode well for trying to find remains.
No, or any type of evidence that may have been washed away. 2 days after the search began, it was called off on December 23rd, 2017. Given the unforgiving climate and terrain, authorities determined it would be impossible for Paddy to still be alive. Over the next few weeks, Laramie residents were interviewed and 2 more searches were conducted of the area, including the rubbish dump. Animal shelters and local veterinarians were also encouraged to call the police if they came across any dogs resembling Kelly. Still, nothing. In a town of 12, no one seemed to know what happened to Paddy and his dog after leaving the pub that fateful night.
And when the police all came on Christmas Day to do the first round of interviews, they were sitting everybody down. And you're a cop, right? You have to be like, did you do it? And everyone's like, fuck you, copper. I didn't do shit.
Yeah,
but it
Merry
was to the
Christmas.
point, yeah, get the fuck out of here. But to the point where the cops were interviewing him and they're like, yeah. And then Dave went over there and they're like, who's Dave? And they're like, oh yeah, the guy who lives on the edge of town, Dave. And the cops were like, no, we didn't know there was another person named Dave. And they're like, hey, he lives around Beck. And it's just, there's a whole
it's
other
like the guy on the couch. Yeah. It's like, oh yeah, everybody knows Dave. And it's like, we don't, because y'all are way removed from the rest of the world out here. But it's something that they take for granted. And also, you've kind of learned to self-govern yourselves.
Right. It's a lot of like, well, he ain't bothering anybody. He comes in town, he does his business, he leaves. And that's what a lot of the Lost in Laramie podcast goes into, these interpersonal relationships and how they developed over time, and how it is this kind of laissez-faire attitude of, if you aren't super duper close with somebody, you maybe wouldn't go poking around and bug them if they're missing. But the police, they have to ask. Yeah. And
that's kind of their job, is to go poking around.
They're like, it wasn't me. Fuck you.
Cracks open a Foster's.
Honestly. Yeah.
As the investigation proceeded, tips came in steadily. Theories ranged from Paddy faking his own death to avoid being killed by drug dealers to actually being killed by drug dealers. Journalist and editor Mark Wilton told writers Graham and Stevenson that he and his wife were sure they saw Paddy alive right after his disappearance. The couple was driving down the Stewart Highway on December 19th, 3 days after Paddy had gone missing. They saw a small tan man in a hat with a large mustache in a town 180 kilometers or 111 miles south of Laram. The man was walking with a black and tan dog similar to Kelly. A van was parked nearby, partially obscured by trees. Days later, Wilton saw a post on Facebook about Paddy's case. He and his wife were sure the man they had seen was Paddy. They called the tip into police, who investigated and determined there was no evidence to support the lead. But Mark Wilton told Graham and Stevenson,
I'll go to my grave convinced we saw Paddy.
Sergeant Mark Allen of the Northern Territory Police believes Paddy faking his death would be unlikely due to the amount of sophistication it would take, as well as Paddy's various medical needs.
And that was something else that Detective Sergeant Allen talked about, was looking for what they would call signs of life in the, weeks, weeks, and months immediately following that, of like any access of his bank accounts, any access of his, renewing his prescription medication that he had a heart condition for. So he, you can't live without it. So you would need to get a refill somewhere, and use of his any kind of driver's license, passport, anything like that.
And all of that was at his house too. Yeah. Along with all his modes of transportation.
Yeah, it's like, unless you got snatched up by something while you were out there, which Richard Simpson, the bartender, was like, aliens didn't take Paddy, and if they had, they'd have dropped him off by now. If somebody that looked like Paddy was spotted, and Mark Wilton was sure it was him, but if it was him, he would have left every single thing behind and had to have a completely fresh start, which if you're 70, that seems like a lot. It'd be like, nah.
Yeah, it seems unlikely to me that would be him, but wouldn't it have been nice if it was? And
right.
He was living his life the way he wanted to.
Yeah, that him and Kelly were alive.
Long-term Laramie resident Barry Burke, also known as Cookie, told officials he didn't think anyone would hurt Paddy, saying,
hey, he's a bit of a shit stir, but not enough for anyone to knock him off.
If Paddy hadn't gone out of town to visit friends, Cookie reasoned,
he'd probably gone off for a walk with his dog and fell into his sinkhole.
Police dismissed this theory. Several thorough searches turned up no signs of a body having been dumped or having fallen into any area within walking distance of Laramie. Kelly would also likely have come back to town if Paddy had a medical episode or died via accident.
Which obviously this seems like the most likely circumstance, because they said 38,000 people a year go missing in Australia. Like every 3 hours just is never to return.
That is such a staggering statistic. And when they said that I think we even had to pause and rewind and be like, did we hear that right? One person every 3 hours goes missing in Australia. And because so much of it is the bush where, and the climate and the terrain and the animals and everything is just so unforgiving that They say people go out there all the time to camp or for a hike. They get lost, they get turned around, and then they succumb to the elements, or a sinkhole swallows them
Yeah,
up,
dude.
or they fall off the edge of the earth.
Well, that's what you think too. And like you said, the climate was a big deal because around this time, it was around 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And so if he had gone walking, he would not have been able to make, he's 70 years old, even though he's, experienced in the bush and stuff. You can only stand so much heat and distance. And that, if the dog would run back to and they said they would be able to notice carrion, like the type of birds of prey that would eat carrion, like they would, they didn't see any of that. Yeah.
Unsurprisingly, Fran Hodgetts became a prime suspect in Paddy's disappearance. The tea house owner and Paddy had been in the midst of a decades-long feud when he went missing. It certainly didn't help that just 4 days before Paddy was last seen, he had thrown a dead kangaroo on Fran's property, directly beneath her bedroom window. Authorities wondered if this may have been the breaking point for Fran. However, the exotic meat pie maker remained adamant she had nothing to do with Paddy's disappearance, as did the other Laram townsfolk.
Probably the number one thing I love about Fran is that although she was the suspect, and there's old footage of her being like, I had a lot of problems with him, that in after she's already been accused, current footage, she's like, I hated Paddy. He's a piece of, like, she doesn't try to save herself. She's just like, I didn't kill him. Absolutely, I didn't kill him. But also, he sucked. Like, she's not speaking in like pussyfooting around.
No, she also has kind of a sly grin on her face in all of the interviews on the documentary. Like, no, I don't know what happened to him.
Yeah.
It was just like this shitting grin on her face the whole time. You're like, do you, Fran, or do you really know what happened to him?
In my notes I wrote down, she said, as much as I hated the man, I don't know what happened to him. But she said, I hated him. I wanted to be gone. She said, everything's better with him gone. I didn't do it, but it's awesome.
But
and it's
it worked out for me.
Yeah, it did. It's sometimes things are convenient for you, even if you are not responsible directly.
In early June of 2018, a coronial inquest was convened to determine the cause and manner of Paddy's death. Despite having no body, the counsel assisting the coroner asked the court to convene early, given the advanced ages and health conditions of the witnesses involved. Fran's mysterious gardener, Owen Laurie, testified to his background. He worked on the railways until his mid-30s, then worked in the timber industry, in the mines, and on a cattle station. In August of 2017, Owen saw Fran's newspaper ad for a gardener/caretaker role. He interviewed with Fran down in Laram, during which she told him that Paddy had poisoned her plants. Owen told Fran in their first meeting that had he known about the feud with Paddy, he never would have come.
And that's just a big, beautiful bush with pink flowers and everything. And he would go and pour stuff on it to kill it just because he hated her.
Because they just hated each other. I mean, it was just these mean-spirited, malicious things that he would do to her. And, she didn't retaliate in the ways of going over to his property and doing stuff. She, bad-mouthed them and everything. But he was throwing dead animals on her lawn and, taking her livelihood away out there. There's not a lot of jobs. So if you're, in fact, are there any except working at the pub and then your tea house where you're relying on tourists and people traveling through to stop? And if you've got somebody that's like, don't go over there, it's full of dead dog. You're like, oh, well, now all of a sudden, I'm a 70-year-old woman whose health is failing. I have no income. And this guy is making my life miserable every single day.
Right. And it's just these it seems like small things, but when that's your whole life, and it's not like, oh, I have a neighbor I'm having a tough time with my neighbor, but I have this whole other big world to continue. That's your whole entire world. And she seems in the interviews like she is on fight or flight mode. She's fighting. It takes a toll on you.
Oh,
if you're the person in town when you haven't been to the pub that everybody calls home in 15 years. And for the character study that this is, it's that's something to study of what happens when someone is isolated and mistreated.
Yeah. And you have no other outlet, or support system. This is also where we first hear of this gardener, Owen, who in the footage from, the years prior when they were doing interviews and stuff in Laram of just the townsfolk.
Yeah, he hadn't moved there yet.
And then he's seen in some later footage just kind of walking around, tending to the plants, but always head down, usually shirtless, not making eye contact, doesn't talk to anybody, and everyone in town's like, oh yeah, we don't talk to him. He only talks to Fran. Yeah.
He lives in the shed behind her house. I don't know. He came. Where's he from? I don't know.
No
from
idea.
Out of town.
No idea.
He answered a newspaper ad, showed up, and she was like, "All right, you hired." And then now he just lives in the shed behind Grandma's house.
Again, not a lot of questions asked because he was the type of person that didn't want a lot of questions asked, as were a lot of these people.
Right. It's like, my question is, can you do this work in this place? And I don't really have a whole lot of other applicants.
And I also don't have a whole lot of worries. As long as you do what you say you're going to do, I'll pay you, or you can live here for free. And that's about as far as our relationship goes.
Right. We're good to go.
Owen stayed anyway, living in a small bungalow on Fran's property in exchange for work. A mysterious presence, Owen spoke only to Fran and was rarely seen by others in town. He testified that he heard a lot about Paddy, but only spoke to the man once, on the morning of December 13th, 2017, 4 days before Paddy's disappearance. Barry Sharp, the pub owner, testified that before his disappearance, Paddy mentioned having
ongoing arguments
with Owen. Others in town also had run-ins with Owen and his dog, but only Paddy retaliated by throwing a dead kangaroo over Fran's fence. After the kangaroo incident, Owen admitted to Fran he'd had a conversation with Paddy that day, explaining,
I've just had words with him about the dog coming across the road.
In his testimony, Owen admitted to telling Paddy,
keep your fucking dog at home,
when Kelly crossed the highway. According to Owen, Paddy replied,
shut up.
Bartender Richard Simpson testified that he saw this exchange, though he was too far away to hear what exactly was being said.
So we're confirming that on the morning of December 13th, so 4 days before Paddy went, they're just hollering at each other again over what now? Paddy throwing a kangaroo in their yard and the dogs running back and forth. Because Owen brought a dog as well. He brought, I believe, a pit bull from the town he was in to move and live there with him. So then his dog would run at or lunge at. I think Richard Simpson had two dogs that he had a little bit of a scuffle. Richard Simpson didn't throw a kangaroo in Fran's yard after that, in fact.
No,
but
that
then
was extreme.
Yeah, so that was extreme. And so then Kelly would run across and everything, and that would jump the fence and run around their garden and mess up their flowers. Did she do it because she was just having fun? Or was Paddy like, here, go catch that stick and go run? I don't know. But just more of this poking. And now he's not just poking Fran. He's poking this rando stranger in the shed behind Fran's house that you don't know where he's from or what he's up to.
No. According to Paddy, the scuffle with Owen began after Paddy had asked Owen to stop his dog from barking. Owen then threatened the 70-year-old, saying,
shut your mouth or I'll take your knees out from under you.
According to Fran, Owen bragged about chasing Paddy back to his house after their tense encounter and called Paddy
weak as piss.
Knowing he had a temper, Fran had warned Owen not to do anything stupid as she was going out of town to run errands, saying,
I don't want to have to come back and bail you out of jail.
Yeah, she says in the documentary that he had a temper and that they'd gotten into it on more than one occasion, but kind of had come to an agreement of, you live there, you do your thing, I don't ask you questions, I keep to myself, and, this is how our relationship goes.
Yeah, and it's at least I'm not the target of it. And in fact, if you felt like one in town who had been targeted, like Fran, it probably felt nice to have somebody on your side and have somebody living with you that would holler and take up for you. Although you're like, let's not get the law called, calm down and stop screaming.
One does have to wonder if there was some encouragement from Fran to Owen to, why don't you go over there and say something to this guy?
Yeah. Or even if you don't say something overt and say, I wish you'd go over there and say something, say, it's just really hard when he picks on me.
And Owen was a big man.
Yes.
Big, imposing presence, scary looking.
Yes.
During the hearing, Owen also admitted that he had said,
if anyone touches my plants, it'll be the first murder in Laram.
but insisted it was simply a turn of phrase and that he had
no intention to murder anybody over a garden.
Finally, Owen testified that the night of December 16th, 2017, he received a malware alert on his computer. He claimed he walked to the town's payphone and made 2 calls to the numbers in the alerts. When neither connected, he went home.
And it's also very important to note the location of the payphone is directly within speaking distance of Paddy's house. It's right on the road, kind of directly between where Fran lives and where Paddy lives. So it's all within holler distance. If you were standing at the payphone, you could talk to either person on either porch.
Yes. And it's, at the time that he's saying this happened, it's 3, 4 in the morning or something. So very quiet outside, I would imagine. Also wild that they have a town payphone.
You got to, I guess, just in case if somebody pulls over and there's no cell phone reception,
no, makes
you
sense.
got to be able to call for help.
Yeah, but it's just something that you don't see anymore. Now, back in the 90s and 80s, all the time. I remember my school in middle school, we had a payphone outside the gym, and I used it quite frequently to call my parents, or even in high school, we had a payphone there. But when was the last time you saw a payphone?
Oh, on tour, because, I just go wandering around downtown areas. I saw one, and I'm trying to remember the city we were in because I know what street I was. It might be in Portland, possibly. I'm remembering a place where I got a gluten-free pastry, and I was like, it was on the way to that pastry place. I can't remember the place. But even just having a payphone out there, I always just wondered, is it just a really long cord? Like, how do you connect it? What does it go to? What does it connect to?
I don't understand.
Does it go under the dirt?
Period. So it doesn't make any sense to me. Mm-mm.
Yeah. Even I don't know why, for some reason, a cell phone, I'm like, yeah, it catches the shit out of the air. That's how it works. How do I understand that more than like, we got just one big long cord going all the way back to where? Phone Central?
Yeah.
What?
Mm-hmm. This Phone City, that's where they all connect. And then
Phone City,
somebody
USA.
Somebody just connects it like back in the old days with receptionists. Yeah, just plug and play.
Harris's grandma used to do that. She was like the phone lady in Philly, downtown Philly.
Oh, I love it.
That's what a job.
The initial inquest was adjourned after 2 days of testimony, but no finding was made as to the cause of Paddy's death. As the police investigation continued, COVID delayed further hearings. Nearly 4 years later, in April of 2022, the second inquest hearing began. According to the inquest document, during the time between hearings, the police listed a reward of $250,000 and received further information and allegations. At this second inquest hearing, it was revealed that on December 28, 2017, police had obtained a warrant and installed a listening device in Owen Laurie's home. The recordings were apparently of Owen singing and talking to himself. On 8 different occasions, he used suspicious language, including multiple mentions of a claw hammer, Paddy, and a dog. A recording from February 14, 2018, revealed something particularly shocking. On the tape, Owen can be heard saying aloud to himself,
"Well, they didn't fucking find the hammer. Well, they can't get me for anything."
A few weeks later, in a recording on February 23, 2018, Owen made another shocking admission.
"I killerated old Paddy with that. Struck on the fucking head and killerated him. Basherated him. Doof. Yes, he did. Basherated him. Oh, me cock."
2 days later, Owen had been recorded speaking in repeated phrases, saying things like,
"Fucking killer bastard. You fucking killed fucking Paddy up the bum. You fucking killed Paddy. Donged him on the head. You killed Paddy and hit him on the head. Smacked him on the fucking nostrils with me claw hammer."
Well,
First of all, legally, Owen claims it was not his voice on the recording. He said that at the inquest hearing. He claims it was not him. In a town where you're the only one living in the bungalow and it's a recording device, I would be concerned who was in my bungalow saying things like this. But that as soon as this came out, he said, "I'm not going to make any other statements."
This is what I call Robert Dursting yourself.
That's the moment that this is revealed in the documentary. We were all like full disclosure. I rewatched it since you and I watched it together because it was late and I was like awake and not, I was like kind of, but this, I was like, what? And it's equally as shocking the
And
second
yeah,
time.
specifically the language used, the just hatred and vile words used to describe this are shocking. I don't, there's some other word more than that. It's words that we also like don't hear a lot. So to hear them in this sense, it's extra eerie.
Yeah, and I think the recordings, to clarify, haven't been released. The audio that's in the documentary is an actor reenactment, as is in the Last Stop Laramie podcast. They have actor reenactments, but I don't know really what tone you could ever take that would ever make any of this anything less incriminating than, or at least it sure casts an interesting shadow on him and his role in everything, because it's very specific to say clawhammer and also mention the dog and also mention the location where you bashed. And so the action, it's all the things you would need. Yeah.
After the second hearing, the coroner concluded,
In my opinion, Paddy was killed in the context of and likely due to the ongoing feud he had with his nearest neighbors. He likely died on the evening of 16 December 2017.
the feud included Paddy poisoning Fran's plants and Kelly getting loose and jumping Fran's fence. Despite the alarming recordings of what many feel to be in confession, Owen Laurie was not arrested. Owen told authorities that was not his voice on the damning recordings, then exercised his right to remain silent to prevent further incriminating himself. Kylie Stevenson told ABC Australia,
There were these recordings of the inquest that were pretty explosive, but there's been no outcome, and there's still these other possibilities. It's this thing that's still very unclear and very murky.
Fran also continued to deny any involvement, including the accusation that she paid someone $10,000 to kill Paddy. Fran's nephew, Brent Cilia, who now runs the tea house due to his aunt's failing health, described the torment his aunt has suffered because of the allegations.
There's been a world of abuse as people drive past the house. Also, phone calls. People have called her and said stuff to her. There's been vandalism at the shop. People have painted over signs that I repainted over. Rubbish gets thrown and stuff goes missing from under the house.
Brent claims the abuse is mostly from outsiders visiting Laramie, not fellow residents, and that it has taken a toll on Fran.
The way she has to live now and seclude herself is making her feel lonely and depressed and emotionally in a bad way.
And that's with Paddy gone. I mean, she was already feeling those things with him there. And it's like, well, now you have a different set of problems.
Yeah, and it's really one of those kind of be careful what you wish for, because not that I think she ever wished him dead, but I think she wished he would just be gone and leave. And you get that wish, but then the flip side is you have millions of strangers that don't know you seeing this headline going, oh, she's the Sweeney Todd lady. She cooked him into a pie. It was her. She fed him to the crocodile. She's a monster. And she's not alone out. I mean, she's alone out there, but she's not alone in the world. She's somebody's grandma. She's somebody's great grandma. And they describe one of her grandkids getting on Facebook going, oh my gosh, a death in Laramie? It was probably, the elements, and click on it. And the comments being like, Fran Hodgetts is a murderer, 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 murderer. And he's like, Nan, no.
Yeah.
I mean, truly, it's like, oh God, I got to get out there.
Mm-hmm. Bill Hodgetts and Barry Sharp have since passed away. However, with the arrival of a new young couple and their baby, the town's population has remained relatively the same. Happily, there appears to be way less infighting, with the addition of a baby having given new life to the town. The hotel has been renovated, roads have been repaired, and there is even talk of Laramie becoming Australia's next boom town, with Imperial Oil and Gas proposing to drill 6 exploration wells on the edge of the town to tap into the Northern Territory's gas-rich Beetaloo Basin, according to ABC Australia. The potential for added growth has many of the older residents concerned that their isolated paradise may soon be overrun with noise and people.
And I think it's like 6,000 hectares, some huge portion of it. Like they're going to plant a watermelon grove, and they're going to have, obviously you're going to produce enough watermelons that you're going to now have to have, whether it's trucks to take them out or something. I mean, so no matter what, it's this double-edged sword of progress, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And Brent, who is running the tea house now, said, I get it. The older residents here, I don't want anything taken away from them and why they moved here to have a little more isolation and space. At the same time, my business depends on people coming through town. And, you know, if people see people in the courtyard eating, they're way more likely to stop than if it's just a deserted place. So it's kind of like you said, be careful what you wish for. But also the residents there have said, we're all in our 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, when two of them die, like you start to see like your friends just are dwindling and no one's getting any younger. And then a new couple does move in, a young couple with a baby. And I felt like it was that, what's that? Hold on. What's that movie with fucking, where the baby, like no one's been pregnant in so long.
3 Men and a Baby.
No, it's so good. I gotta figure.
No one's pregnant at all in that movie.
Your
it's 3 Men.
Will know. I don't have my phone. Colin.
Who's in it?
Not Colin Firth. Look, Google movie where baby is born in a
Children of Men.
Yes, that's it. It reminded me of Children of Men, how like these people haven't seen a baby in so long. And then, you know, it's like literal new life is birthed into this town. And in the documentary, you see the older residents like holding this baby and seeing like the light on their faces kind of returning of like, this is what, you know, it's a reminder of youth and like of hope and what could be. All that to say, if no one new moves in, the town it goes away. Everyone that's there is dying off. So like if you want it to continue, some people are going to have to move in and there's going to have to be growth. And that might be in the way of like things happening that makes it less isolated, but more sustainable. And, you know, more people can live there.
That's a good way to put it. Less isolated, but more sustainable. But still, I mean, it's still going to remain isolated just given its location.
For
but
sure.
It is fascinating, this concept of the good old days, because in some of the 2011 footage and even, you know, some of the more recently shot footage where they're like, oh, well, what was it like, you know, when you first moved here in the 80s? Oh, that was the good old days, mate. Well, then what happened in 2017, now 6 years later of like, oh, it sucks now. That was the good old days before Paddy died. And then it's like, well, now they're going to build something. Well, now 2023 was the good old days before the fucking oil and gas people moved in. But it's just, you can't really be resistant to change because by nature of just a town is defined by the humans in it, that it's always going to change by who comes and goes and leaves and ages and dies. And Fran doesn't even live there anymore. She had to go live, at least as of the book, she was living in Melbourne getting breast cancer treatments. So, you know,
it's just her nephew kind of took over. Yeah. It's a weird dichotomy of like, we want things to be preserved, yet we also realize that at some point, everyone here will die off. And unless new life comes to this town, Laram will cease to exist. Yeah.
It's like the ship of Theseus of towns. Like, is it still the same town since everybody's now been replaced by somebody?
Paddy's mysterious and tragic case has been the subject of multiple books, award-winning podcasts, and a recent HBO documentary directed by Thomas Tancred and produced by the Duplass brothers. Indeed, no one has been arrested for the disappearance or murder of Paddy, a misstep which has left a hole in the community, according to Brent Cilia.
It's not solved. It's not closed. Nothing's happening. It's just left in the unknown still.
According to Sergeant Allen of the Northern Territory Police, the case remains open and police are still looking for information. He told The Guardian,
even if you don't think you have any useful information, the smallest clue may be just what we need to resolve the case.
Anyone with information or who was in Laramie at the time of Paddy's disappearance who hasn't already come forward is asked to contact Crime Stoppers at 1-800-333-000. So what do we think?
Well, for me, it's that question of what is going to happen now, because I think you're not going to be able to solve Paddy's death in so far as knowing exactly what happened forensically, because you can't. I think he got washed away with the monsoon. Whatever happened to him in or around or near his house, I think he was taken somewhere and disposed of in a place, he and Kelly both, and whatever elements took him, whether that was Thomas Tankard said that he was talking to folks and, kind of going, well, kind of off the record, what do you really think happened? And they basically said, if you drive south of here, there is nothing. There's not even gas stations. There's not security cameras. It is darkness and woods and nothing. And you don't have to go very far to be able to put a body out. And there are animals that will eat the flesh of the body. And then there are other feral pigs that will come and eat the bones of the body. And there will be nothing you will see. And there's just going to be nothing left.
Yeah.
So for that part of it, I'm sad that because there's people that live, Mark and Karen, who were some of the newer residents, really love Paddy.
Mm-hmm.
Barry Sharp's now passed away, but some of those folks that were there had fond memories and loved them. And that would be this idea of bringing someone home. More horrifying than that's a person possibly that has, maybe if these recordings are to be believed, has violently killed an elderly gentleman over a feud about a dog and some garden stuff and is just loose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you're capable of that, in my opinion, you're capable of pretty much anything. Once you've crossed that line and you're willing to take another human's life over something like that, I mean, the gloves are off at that point. I think you're capable of doing anything, including killing again. I don't know if it's the law of the bush, the 3 days of waiting before he was reported missing, combination of just Mother Nature, but I agree. I don't think it's going to be solved short of a confession, which many believe has already happened. What more do you need? But, I mean, he said that it wasn't his voice. And the part that's kind of confusing to me is the police put this recording device in his house somehow without him knowing. They get this, but he's like, no, it wasn't me. I'm not talking anymore. And then it's just dropped.
Yeah, well, I mean, to say it's been a little bit over a year now since the recording was made public at this second inquest hearing, because the first inquest hearing happened in June. But you're right, the timing is very interesting because let's just distill the timeline down very quickly. Paddy goes missing December 16th, 2017. The recording device is 10 days later, 11 days later, installed in Owen's house. The recordings of Owen saying these things is February of 2018. Then the inquest is June, but the recordings don't come out at the June inquest in 2018. They're held for almost 4 more years while other investigations going on. Maybe the police didn't want to tip their hand and thought, if we make him aware of these recordings, he's definitely not going to come and participate. He's going to go on the run. We're going to lose him. So maybe that's why they don't expect COVID to happen. And then, by the time you can gather everybody back together, and I'm glad they held that initial, which would in another case be a premature hearing. But in this case, because everybody was having health problems, they're all in their 70s, I'm glad they captured that sworn testimony, because then when you come back, you're not at least going, well, we would have interviewed everybody, but about 50% of the town's dead or moved. But I don't understand what more they need other than, I guess, if you are a jury, does that get you there? There's no body. There's nothing other than this recording. And
yeah, but it still seems like and I don't know if the laws over there are different. So I'm going to explain it how it happened in the States. But if you had an alleged confession or an admission of some sort was recorded, you would be taken down to the station and you would be questioned and interrogated for a really long time until something happened. And then maybe you don't have anything, so you let them go. But I imagine during that interrogation, you're going to put some pieces together. Okay, it wasn't you. Well, then who was it? Okay, well, we need a name because we need to go talk to that person. We're not just going to let this go. It's a town of 12 people. This was in your house where you live by yourself. You never have anybody over. How it's just,
it's nobody from out of town came to visit you. We all would have seen it.
And it just seems very obvious, in my opinion, based on the evidence at hand, what happened. And somehow, because of laws or how things are just different, it's not as an open and shut case over there as I think it could be.
Yeah, the question is then too if that would get into more Australian your civil rights as far as like how they obtained a warrant, so it sounds legit. The only thing I could think that would maybe work in Owen's favor would be if they could prove there was some defect with the warrant, and then you would file, you quash the warrant that got the statement, then that statement can never be used.
Right.
But I didn't see any evidence of that there was issues with the warrant.
And why wasn't it released at the first inquest? Because it was so timely that you're like, I mean, now it's like the longer it goes on, the less impactful I think it becomes. But if you release it right at the beginning, it's like, oh, well, this kind of answers all of our questions, right?
Yeah, the only thing I can think of is that they thought if they released it too soon, he would run off. And for a person who kind of has no background, it's like kind of no ties, is willing to just leave easily. It's not like a person with an established wife and kids and they've got a small business that they run and he can't just up and run in the night. He's a nameless gardener getting paid under the table in a bungalow in Laram with 12 people. He could jump on a quad bike. He's gone,
But why wasn't that enough to arrest him?
That's a great question. I would imagine it would fall under not a sufficient evidence, because all you have is that statement. Yeah. And what if he says, I hated him and that was a fantasy that I had, and I would sing that fantasy to myself all the time. And I got out of the habit of I just never got out of the habit of singing it even after he was dead. Yeah. So I don't know. You can't prove a bush pig didn't run up out of the thing and get a hold of him. And I just sing that song to myself because it's a fantasy at night. And it's like,
no, that's true. I mean, without any sort of evidence, I don't think a jury can convict on that. I still wonder if he had been held and some searches of the property had been done. Do we find a claw hammer? Do we find other things, other type of evidence, bloody clothes, something, I mean, the mileage on his vehicle, like, could you tell that, like, oh, he just drove like 100 miles out in the middle of nowhere and back to, and why is that? Why is he on the phone?
Yeah.
Who's he calling? It's not really malware, in my opinion.
It's a weird thing to say. I'm calling about malware.
Mm-hmm. No, at 5 a.m. or whatever. I also, just hypothetically, if you live in a bungalow behind someone's house that you work for, and that's the only person you talk to, and everything is so close and it's so quiet, hypothetically, I think it would be very difficult to, for someone to be killed on your property by someone that worked for you and you not know anything about that.
Yeah. Especially given the conversation between Paddy and Owen about the dogs down at the bar, they could hear that.
Yeah. And on record, Owen admitted that he told Fran, I've had words with him about the dog. Owen knew that the kangaroo incident had occurred. He had said, if anybody does anything to my plants, that'll be the first murder in Laram. There's a lot of context that, yes, there's no body. It's all circumstantial. When you ball up a bunch of circumstantial stuff, a lot of times for me, it just answers the questions that I may have.
Well, I think what we're all struggling with is when you have something that seems like a glaring piece of evidence, but it's not sufficient for someone to be held legally culpable. We all have this gut feeling of like, but come on, 2 and 2, 4, right? And it's like, well, we have a 2 and we have a space that could also be a 2, but we don't have enough to say it's 4. And that is where law school beats the emotion out of you a lot of times. It is like, well, it makes me feel sick sometimes because of how I do think about things and be like, well, no, he didn't do it. Legally speaking, Owen Laurie is innocent. He did nothing wrong. He did nothing. What the gut feeling that folks may get from listening to our episode or listening to Lost in Laram, reading the book Laram, watching Last Stop Laram on HBO is, I feel like I kind of know what happened here.
Mm-hmm.
And what it's interesting to us that, and I don't think it's interesting. I think it's natural for us that we want to see some kind of justice, and like, what will that justice be?
Mm-hmm.
And what does that look like? And for the, few folks that loved Paddy and wanted his memory to live on, I think his memory will live on. He is more famous than he could have ever imagined. His story will go on and on forever. I hope his kids, wherever they are, will find some solace in their dad's story being told and can reconcile all that, because that's a lot of pain coming, given how they were even conceived.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of pain. And for the rest of us who want some kind of justice, maybe somebody will pipe up that knows something. Somebody maybe is getting older, doesn't have a lot of more time left, and will deathbed confess how much or how little they knew, or how much or how little they were involved.
It's one thing that's always struck me too, is because it was late, it's so quiet. If what was said on those recordings happened, for no one to hear that, that raises eyebrows to me, because it is such a violent way to attack and kill a person and an animal, that I imagine that was not that wasn't a quiet way to go.
Yeah. And it may be, what was that screaming down there? And it's like, they were watching TV, or I don't know. Or everybody, it just so happened that the circumstances were right that people didn't hear it that night. But you're right. That sounds like a violent death. And especially, I mean, the disposal, it sounds like, from Thomas Tankard was like, it's not that far to go. And you could do it at night, maybe when nobody heard, crank up the old quad bike and put whatever you want on the back, or take care of it at home and then go take it somewhere. I don't know. But it seems like, of all the scenarios, the coroner's opinion is that Paddy was killed by criminal means as a result of this ongoing feud. And nobody else, I don't think anybody's really pushing for any more justice than that.
Yeah. And that might be, like we've said the whole episode, people aren't trying to poke the bear out there, other residents, and get involved in people's stuff, even if it is your friend. Like, like the rules of the bush, like, also maybe fear for themselves. I mean, if you were like, oh, well, in a town of now 11 people, I'm pretty sure one of them killed our friend.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to be the one to say anything, because who's to say it couldn't happen again?
Timeline-wise, Owen moved to Laram August of 2017 and left about a year later. So the coronial inquest was June of 2018, and he left slightly thereafter. So that's a good point. I mean, what are you going to go around and confront people when you're 75 years old and, you have extremely frail, not able to get around? So you're not going to go fight somebody who killed your friend, and Barry ended up, I believe he got pancreatic cancer. So they were all struck with these health issues that the few folks that may have still fought for him wouldn't be able to anymore. But my big takeaway, and like I said at the beginning, it gives me hope for all of humanity, because I'm going to cry when I talk about this, because Brent, I thought, for some reason, I thought Brent was her grandson, but her nephew, Brent, whoever's running the tea house that's related to Fran right now, he talked to Kylie and Caroline, who wrote the book Laram, and he said, he's like, everybody said they hated each other, but he said deep down they couldn't have, because they didn't know each other.
No,
he said people in this town did not talk to her for 15 years.
Yeah.
And like, think about what happens when you do that, when you cross your arms and you go, I know, fuck her. I know what she's going to say. I don't even have to talk to her. What does that do to you? What does that do to her? It's just eating more poison and expecting them to die. And he said he really hopes for a peaceful future, because he said he was the youngest of 8 siblings. And he said, it's basically like a family. And he said, this town should be like a family. I'm the youngest of 8. There's 8 people here. And he said, to me, it's like living with my family in that one house. We're all in this one town. We're all in it together. I know how it's got to work. You've got to be there for one another. Even if you do fight, you put that aside and you help each other.
Perfectly said. And I think younger people moving in and having that same type of attitude will
healthy.
be the way to go. And I hope that can happen while some of the older residents are still there, so they spend their final years in this place that they love and have called home for so long. with happy memories. And then it's like, oh, well, we went out with the best it ever was. Instead of, oh, that's when it was good. It's like, no, this is the best it's ever been. And we're glad that we finally got to where we could all be in a place like this.
Yes, finding that balance between we're a whimsical, weird outback town with a Pink Panther pub with this big ass Pink Panther that gets you to stop, but it's not also so funny because of how shitty they are to each other and how much they hate each other and how much they torture and are mean to each other, which is, there were these pockets of community. It was just so sad that the 3 pockets or 2 or 3 pockets were separate when they could have been so much happier and so much stronger together. So I love that beautiful thought of like, peace can be achieved. We just have to talk to each other and we cannot ignore for 15 years, because you can't hate somebody you haven't talked to for 15 years because you haven't talked to them.
What a poignant, that's very self-aware and
it's beautiful.
Yeah, to think like that. And I hadn't thought of it like that, but I totally agree. And it's just that dug in, I gotta be right. You know, and like, you can't let stuff go. And it's holding these grudges
so tight.
And it's like, who is that benefiting? It's like, it becomes a competition of who can hold the grudge the longest or be the angriest or do the most hateful things. And at the end of the day, like, who is that for? Like, does that really honestly make you feel better? Or does it drive a wedge between all of you to the point where it's 15 years and you haven't talked to somebody and half the town is dying? And, you know, like, think back to those early days when everyone was getting along. It's sad that it came to that, but I hope that we're on the precipice of like a new wave of Laram.
Yeah, a new way of the way of the bush, and it's a happy bush.
Yeah, it's a happy. Nobody likes a sad bush. I mean, no, that's universal.
You can't have a sad bush because so many things are ready to crawl out of that bush and fucking kill you that have no conscience of any kind.
No, they're just living their fucking lives. Y'all, if you think, it Laram belongs to the Crocs and the bush, and like 12 people just happen to live there, and I think that
this world is not ours.
They do know. And I think they have a healthy respect for the wildlife there and everything, and understand that you got to have that same respect for the humans there too. You know,
even if you just got to fight for it. Even if you do fight, you just got to be there for each other. You put it aside and help each other
like a family.
And that's the only way to avoid the Crocs getting you. Cannot help you with a sinkhole. No. That shit's going to happen on its own. Sorry about you, but
God damn, what a place. And what a story. And, you know, if anybody has information, like Sergeant Allen said, it could be the smallest of things, you know, call Crime Stoppers, 1-800-333-000, because regardless if he has no family left or no friends, no one deserves to go out like that. And everyone deserves to have justice for themselves. It doesn't have to be for others. Just he and his dog deserve justice.
Yeah, it's like your existence as a human is what makes you worthy of justice, not because of what you did or who you were, good, bad, and different. And if you would like more, Caroline Graham and Kylie Stevenson's book, it's completely in depth, and they are such a resource on this, and were such a help.
Well, if you like our free episodes, you'll love our Patreon bonus content. You can join for free to see what we're up to next, or dive into over 500 hours of bonus content. Heather, there's so much that we've posted recently. I don't even know. What all have we put up there recently?
What have we been up to? Well, if you listen to our Battleship North Carolina episode, we did a live stream Q&A where we answered questions, and members of the Ghost Guild were in the chat also answering questions. So you can check out the replay of that live stream. We just had a true crime headlines where we talked about the recent influx of terroristic mail that's going out to election offices.
That's wild and scary.
Very scary. We also talked about the murder out of Minot, North Dakota. That was a poisoning murder that just happened. And we have a Am I the Asshole coming up for you this week. So a little asshole to enjoy if you're, want to you get away from your family, you're stuffed with the turkey. You'd be like, I'm going to go for a walk. Go for a walk. Let the turkey judge us. Listen to some assholes.
Or you're like, okay, Uncle Dave, we're all tired of hearing you talk about your politics. Let's listen to this podcast. It just so happens to be an Am I the Asshole segment. Oh, and we also have the Battleship North Carolina video of our paranormal investigation up on our YouTube. You can go check that out, as well as a recent live show we had in Dallas. You can check out the slideshow where I don't want to say that we solved what happened with the assassination of JFK, but I think we're onto something.
I just need to figure out how we can send our theory to Oliver Stone. He's the only one that can help.
OliverStone@gmail.com.
That's it. It's Oliver. A lot of people think it's Oliver Stone. It's not. That's a different guy. That's a guy named Oliver who sells stones. But director Oliver Stone, just Oliver Stone.
But also OliverStone@gmail.com is not the director Oliver Stone. It's Oliver's tone, and it's just like a musician named Oliver, and he's just like, I'm so tired of getting people's theories about what happened to JFK. That is not me. It's Oliver_Stone@gmail.com. It's probably what his email is.
It's actually probably at hotmail.com. Let's be real, but
at AOL.com.
Burn on Oliver Stone.
Well, it was a fun live show and a great slideshow. So you can check that out too. It's up on our Patreon for free. You don't even have to subscribe to a tier. We like to do fun stuff for all the ones that want to just sign up free to see what we're up to. And then you'll also get notifications when we do other stuff. So you can decide, maybe I want to upgrade my tier to hear what these two idiots are talking about this week.
Let's hear some assholes. We can also go to Sinisterhood.com and click shop on the top banner to check out Sinisterhood merch like t-shirts, mugs, totes, stickers, and even clothes for your kiddos. For a limited time only, we also have some sales going on over at our TikTok shop. So go to our TikTok page at Sinisterhood Podcast and check out the shop over there. They do the sales. Like TikTok, I just log in and I'm like, this is on sale.
Yeah,
cool.
They do their own thing.
What else?
You can also check out all of our super funny TikToks that Paris makes it funny. Also, creative, interesting, some are morbid, but they're all very good no matter what the subject is.
It's like the show. Is it funny or sad? Depends on what day it is. I don't know.
Who knows? While you're on our website, you can also review the show, follow us on socials, and check out the episode description for sources used during our research. You'll also find fun things like topic-based playlists and links to live show tickets. And also for any recent patrons that have recently signed up, make sure you stick around after our sign-off so you can hear your shout-out.
You can follow us on Instagram and Threads at Sinisterhood Pod, like us on Facebook at Sinisterhood, and you can follow us on YouTube to see videos of all kinds, episodes, clips, and more at Sinisterhood Podcast, same handle as our TikTok, and head over to Cameo where you can order custom personalized videos, shout outs. It's the perfect gift for somebody who already has everything, and you're like, they got the sweatshirt, they got the sticker, they got the mug. What else can I get them? Get them a Cameo. Cameos are so much fun. If you want to see how people react, you can see me and Christy reacting to our own cameos. I got her one from Fiona the Hippo, and she got me one from Zach Guilford, aka the biggest Sinisterhood fan in the world, and our future best friend. But we put that for free on Patreon as well if you want to see that. But a cameo as a recipient of one, I'm no Zach Guilford, I'll tell you that. But it's a super fun time whenever. Oh no,
no one is.
No, none of us are. But it's great when they open it up. It's such a huge surprise. And we also have 24-hour delivery if it's somebody's birthday or your anniversary and you forgot.
Yeah.
So go to cameo.com. Just tell us what you want the video to say. And it's one of our favorite things to do. So head over there and book it now.
Yeah, great holiday gift, especially if it's like, the eve of Christmas you're like, whoopsie.
Yeah. We'll pick a cutoff time that's reasonable, but me and you will probably just be together doing cameos like the day or the evening before. But that's what we're there for. We got your back if you forgot. Because as two people who often forget gifts for others, like at least me, I will be like,
the time.
Oh, God damn it. I got to go in the store on my way to the party.
Yep.
That's a perfect way to do it. Where are you at online, Christy?
I'm on Instagram at Christy M. Wallace and TikTok at Christy or GTFO. Heather, where are you?
I'm on the internet at Heather versus the world.
As always, the devil rules the airwaves.
Keep it creepy. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for supporting the show on Patreon. Here are your special Patreon shout-outs. Bailey Bond.
Sarah.
Amethyst Dahlia GM30.
Megan Keebler.
Tia Weiler.
Allie Edwards.
Patty Sotolongo.
Tammy Cardosh.
Jen Wallander.
Alex Peterson.
Kate.
Shauna Temple.
Zoe Leasock.
And B, don't brunch. Thank you all so much for supporting the show. We could not do this without you. We sincerely love and appreciate you. We're so grateful for you during this season of being thankful. We could not be more thankful for you all. We hope you pronounce your names correctly. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep it creepy.
Mwah.